My name is Rachel, and if you had told me a year ago that I'd be sitting here telling you this, I would have laughed. But now, every time I close my eyes, I can still hear the whispers. It all started when my cousin Eric invited me to spend the weekend at his family's cabin. He said it would be a fun getaway, a chance to get out of the city for a while. So, I packed my bags, and off we went, 2 hours into the wilderness, to a place I had never seen before. The cabin itself wasn't much to look at. Old, weathered wood with a sagging roof. It was small, but it had a certain charm to it. Eric was excited about the trip, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The trees around the cabin seemed too close, almost like they were crowding in on us, suffocating the place. We spent the first day exploring the area, hiking through the woods, and playing games in the cabin. By nightfall, I was exhausted, so I curled up in the living room while Eric went out to start a fire. It was peaceful at first, the crackling of the fire mixing with the sounds of the forest. That's when it started. At first it was a faint noise barely audible, like a soft whispering. I thought it was just the wind moving through the trees, but then I realized the whispers weren't coming from outside. They were coming from inside the cabin. I sat up, straining to hear, but the whispers were gone. I brushed it off as my imagination, though I couldn't shake the sense of unease creeping up my spine. Eric came back inside, and we settled in for the night, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I was being watched. It wasn't until the second night that things took a darker turn. I woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers were back, this time, as if someone was standing just outside the door, whispering my name. I lay still in bed, terrified to move. The air felt heavy, thick with an oppressive energy that I couldn't explain. I reached over to shake Eric awake, but he wasn't in bed. I didn't hear him moving around, so I stood up and walked to the door, my legs shaking beneath me. The whispers were now joined by a faint scraping sound, like fingernails against wood. I opened the door and stepped out into the darkness. The forest was eerily quiet. No wind, no animals, just the whispers, now clear as day. Rachel, they called, each voice distinct, like multiple people speaking at once. I followed the sound, my feet dragging through the wet grass. The moon was barely visible, hidden behind clouds. But I didn't need to see the path. I just followed the whispers, which seemed to guide me deeper into the woods. I don't know how long I walked, but eventually, I found myself at the edge of a clearing. There, standing in the center, was a figure. It was tall, shadowy, its form shifting and twisting like smoke. I froze, my heart stopping as I realized what it was. It wasn't human. It had no face, just empty, hollow eyes staring back at me. And the whispers. They were coming from it, emanating from its very presence. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. I couldn't move. My body was frozen, as if the figure had paralyzed me with its gaze. Then, from behind me, I heard Eric's voice. Rachel, get back here. I turned to find him standing in the doorway of the cabin, his face pale and wide-eyed with fear. Without thinking, I ran towards him, but as I turned back, the figure was gonna vanish into the shadows. I don't remember much after that. I must have collapsed from the terror. When I woke up, I was back inside the cabin, and Eric was sitting beside me, trying to calm me down. He said he'd found me in the woods, muttering my name, eyes wide open but not seeing anything. We left the cabin the next morning. We didn't speak much about what happened, but I could see the fear in Eric's eyes. We both knew something had been there, something not human. It's been months since that night, and I haven't been able to shake the feeling that something is still watching me. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I hear whispers, soft at first, but growing louder, and when I close my eyes, I see the shadow, the figure with no face, waiting just beyond the edge of my vision. I don't know what it was that I saw that night, but I know one thing for sure. Whatever it was, It's still out there, in the woods, waiting for someone else to wander too close. My name is Mark, and I thought I knew what fear was till I spent a night in that cabin. What I experienced was something darker than any nightmare I've ever had. I had been looking for a place to escape, a quiet, secluded spot where I could clear my mind and get away from everything. When I found the cabin in the woods, it seemed perfect. No distractions, no noise, just nature and peace. What I didn't know was that the cabin wasn't empty. It wasn't just me there. I arrived in the afternoon, just as the sun was setting. The cabin was old, its walls weathered by time and the harsh elements. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. I unlocked the door, the wood creaking beneath my hand as I stepped inside. The place had a strange, unsettling energy to it, but I brushed it off. I needed to relax. That night, I built a fire in the stone fireplace and sat down with a book. The cabin was small and cozy, the kind of place where you'd expect to feel safe. But as the darkness fell, something felt wrong. The stillness was unnerving. The wind didn't even blow through the trees. It was too quiet. Around midnight, I heard it scratching. At first, it was faint, almost like an animal digging in the dirt. But the sound grew louder, sharper. It was coming from the walls. I stood up, heart pounding, and walked over to the wall where I heard the noise. It was just wood and plaster, nothing unusual. I tried to brush it off as an animal outside, maybe a raccoon or a squirrel. But then the scratching turned into tapping, fast and frantic. It was coming from the ceiling. I grabbed a flashlight and checked the attic. The ladder creaked under my weight as I pulled myself up. The air up there was thick, stale. I scanned the room with the flashlight, but there was nothing, just old insulation, beams, and dust. No animals, no signs of life. Confused, I climbed back down, locking the attic door behind me. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just the house settling. But the tapping continued. I couldn't sleep. I tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. I lay in bed, listening to the incessant tapping, until something worse happened. I heard footsteps. It wasn't the sound of leaves or twigs cracking under the weight of a wandering animal. These footsteps were deliberate, heavy, a person walking on the floor. Above me, I grabbed the flashlight and rushed to the staircase. The house was silent again, as if nothing had happened. I stood there, listening. Nothing. I was alone, but I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Something was watching me, and I wasn't sure if it was inside the cabin or out in the woods, waiting. The next morning, I tried to leave. I packed up my things, my hands trembling as I loaded my car. I was about to leave when I heard something else whispers. Faint at first, but getting louder. They sounded like voices, distant yet clear. I turned toward the trees, the whispers growing louder, but I couldn't understand the words. It was like they were coming from the forest itself, calling to me. I felt like I was being pulled toward the woods, like something was reaching for me, trying to draw me in. I snapped out of it and jumped into my car. I didn't look back as I sped down the dirt road. But as I drove away, I saw something in my rearview mirror. It was fleeting, just a glimpse, but it was enough. A figure standing in the window of the cabin, watching me leave. The figure wasn't human. It was tall, thin, its limbs too long, its face twisted in a grotesque grin. I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing. But when I looked again, there was nothing, just the empty cabin in the woods. I don't know what it was that night, whether it was the cabin, the forest, or something else entirely. But I never went back. And sometimes, when I'm out in the woods, I feel that same pull, like something is still calling to me, waiting for me to return. But I won't ever go back. My name is Jessica, and I don't think I'll ever forget the way the cabin looked that night. It was nothing like I had imagined. It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway, turned into something out of a nightmare. And it all started with those eyes. It had been a tough few months, and I needed a break. A friend of mine suggested renting a cabin in the woods for a weekend. She assured me it would be quiet and serene, a perfect place to recharge. So, I booked it without a second thought, excited about the thought of escaping the chaos of city life. When I arrived, the cabin was even more isolated than I had imagined. It sat alone, surrounded by towering trees, with no other houses for miles. The view was beautiful though, and I felt a strange sense of calm as I stepped inside. The interior was rustic, but charming old wooden floors, a fireplace, and a cozy living room. That first night, everything seemed perfect. I sat by the fire, sipping tea and reading a book, with nothing but the sound of crackling wood to keep me company. It was peaceful, too peaceful. As I started to doze off, I heard a sound, a slight rustle outside the cabin. I brushed it off as an animal in the woods, though I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something was off. The night was still too still. No wind, no sounds from the forest, just the rustling. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was nothing, but then I heard it again. A soft, almost deliberate scratching at the window. I froze. It wasn't the wind. I was sure of it. Slowly, I stood up and walked to the window. The darkness outside was thick, the trees swaying gently. I couldn't see anything, but I felt something was there. I didn't know why, but I was afraid to look, but I did. And that's when I saw them. Two glowing eyes watching me from the edge of the trees. They were far away, but the intensity of the stare sent a chill down my spine. They didn't blink, they didn't move, just stared at me, unmoving, as if they were waiting for something. I pulled back from the window, my heart racing. I wasn't sure what I had seen, but I knew I couldn't go back to sleep in that cabin. I quickly grabbed my phone, but there was no signal. I felt trapped. I spent the next hour pacing the cabin, checking every window, every door, looking for any sign of movement. But the cabin remained silent. The eyes were gone. Eventually, I forced myself to calm down. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. The forest had a way of making things seem unnerving at night, I told myself. But then I heard the scratching. Again. This time, it was louder, closer. I turned towards the door, my breath shallow. The air felt thick, heavy with an invisible pressure. I didn't want to open the door, but I had to know. I had to see what was out there. I opened it slowly, just enough to peer outside. The fog had rolled in, thick and dense, and the trees were barely visible. The silence was suffocating. But then, I heard a voice, soft, barely a whisper, from the darkness. Jessica. I froze, my blood running cold. My name. It was my voice, but it wasn't me. It was distorted, twisted, like a mockery of my own sound. Jessica. Come closer, it said again, this time from the trees. I didn't know who or what was out there, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to find out. I slammed the door shut, locking it. My mind raced as I searched for a way out of this nightmare. I grabbed my bags, but the fear had paralyzed me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The scratching started again, this time on the door. Slow, deliberate, like something was trying to claw its way inside. It sounded like nails on wood, deep and hollow. And then, just as suddenly as it started, everything went silent. I stood in the middle of the cabin, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. No sounds, no movement. After what felt like an eternity, I made a break for it. I grabbed the keys to the car, my heart racing in my chest, and I ran outside. The fog was even thicker now, the trees towering above me like dark shadows. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I didn't stop running until I reached the main road, where I flagged down a passing car. The driver looked at me like I was crazy, but I didn't care. I didn't care if he thought I was insane. All I knew was that I had to get out of there. I never went back to that cabin. Even now, when I close my eyes, I still see those eyes glowing, watching, waiting. And I know that, whatever they were, they're still out there, waiting for someone else to come close enough. My name is Adam, and I'll never forget the night I spent in that cabin. It wasn't the isolation or the wilderness that terrified me, it was the feeling of being watched. Even now, I can't shake the thought that something or someone was waiting for me in those woods. It all began when I decided to take a break from my hectic life and spend a weekend alone in a cabin. I'd found the place online, nestled deep in the forest. It was supposed to be the perfect retreat away from phones, away from people. Just me, a cabin, and the peaceful silence of nature. When I arrived, I was struck by how remote the cabin was. It was isolated, far from any road or nearby house. The cabin itself was old, its wooden walls creaking with age. But it was comfortable, and I quickly set up for the night. The air was crisp and fresh, and I could hear the sounds of the forest around me. Birds chirping, the rustle of leaves, everything felt right. But as the sun began to set, I felt a strange chill in the air. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just the temperature dropping. I made a fire in the hearth and settled in with a book, enjoying the warmth and solitude. The fire crackled, and the cabin grew darker, the shadows stretching across the walls. That's when I first heard it, a soft tapping sound coming from the window. I froze, listening closely. Tap, tap, tap. It was faint, but unmistakable. My first thought was that it was just a branch tapping against the window, but when I checked, there was nothing there. No branches, no wind, just the stillness of the night. I tried to ignore it, but the tapping continued. It wasn't consistent. Sometimes it would stop for a few minutes, only to start up again. It sounded like someone gently knocking on the glass. I checked all the windows, the door, nothing. I even stepped outside, shining my flashlight around the cabin. The forest was pitch black, and the only sound was the occasional rustling of leaves. But no one was there. I returned to the cabin and locked the door. I figured I was just being paranoid after all. I was alone in the middle of nowhere. But as I sat back down, the tapping started again. This time, it was louder, more urgent. I went to the window and pulled back the curtain. Nothing. But as I turned to walk away, I saw it, a face, pressed against the glass. Its features were blurred by the condensation on the window, but it was unmistakable. Someone, or something, was watching me. My heart stopped. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over the lamp. I ran to the door, but before I could open it, I heard a voice, low and raspy, whispering from the other side of the cabin, "Let me in." I didn't move. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't breathe. The voice was wrong, like it wasn't human, like it came from something deep in the earth itself. It chilled me to the bone. The tapping continued, more frantically now. I could hear the person thing scratching at the window, tapping on the glass, trying to get in. I backed away from the door, grabbing my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Of course, there wasn't. I was in the middle of nowhere, miles away from the nearest town, alone. The whispering didn't stop. It became louder, almost frantic. "Let me in," it repeated, growing more insistent. I couldn't tell if it was just one voice or multiple voices, all speaking at once. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my things and tried to leave. But when I opened the door, I was hit by a wall of fog. It was thick, almost suffocating. The ground beneath my feet felt unstable, as if the earth was shifting. I stepped outside, into the fog, but I couldn't see anything. The trees around me were dark silhouettes, their branches reaching out like twisted arms. The only thing I could hear was my own breath and the distant sound of the tapping. I ran as fast as I could, but no matter how far I went, the tapping followed. It was like it was always behind me, growing closer with every step. My legs were burning, my heart racing, but I couldn't stop. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the tapping stopped. The fog lifted, and I found myself standing in front of the cabin again, as if I had never left. The door was wide open, and the fire inside was out. It was completely still. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed my things and ran down the path through the forest, not looking back. I didn't stop until I reached the road, where I flagged down a passing car. I never went back to that cabin, and I don't know if I ever will. I still hear the tapping sometimes, especially when I'm alone, and I always wonder if it was real or if something was waiting for me out there in the woods. My name is Oliver, and I wish I could forget what happened during that weekend. I never believed in the supernatural, but after what I experienced at that cabin, I'm not so sure anymore. It all started when my old college friend, Ben, invited me to spend a weekend at his family's cabin in the mountains. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. The place was supposed to be a retreat, a way to escape the stress of daily life and reconnect with nature. Ben swore the cabin was perfect, hidden in a remote part of the woods, far from any distractions. It sounded great, so I agreed. We arrived late in the evening, just as a thick fog began to roll in. The cabin looked quaint, nestled against the trees like something out of a horror movie. The wooden structure was worn, with ivy creeping up the walls and the roof sagging ever so slightly. I couldn't help but feel uneasy, but Ben assured me it was just old. It had been in his family for generations. That night, the fog grew denser, enveloping the entire cabin. It was as if the world outside had disappeared. No moonlight, no stars, just a wall of mist that pressed against the windows. The air was damp and cold, and the silence was suffocating. We lit a fire in the fireplace and tried to relax, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Around midnight, I went to bed. As I lay there in the dark, listening to the crackling of the fire downstairs, I thought I heard footsteps outside the cabin. They were slow, deliberate, almost as if someone was pacing around the house. I got up to investigate, but saw nothing. The fog was so thick that I could barely make out the trees outside, just the wind. I muttered to myself, trying to calm my racing heart, but the footsteps continued, closer now. I heard them moving around the cabin, just outside my window. I didn't want to go out there, but something urged me to check. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside into the thick fog. The world was silent except for the soft crunch of the ground beneath my feet. I called out, but there was no response. The fog felt alive, closing in around me. I walked around the cabin, shining the flashlight through the haze, but I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. That's when I saw it, a figure, standing motionless in the fog. At first, I thought it was Ben, playing a prank on me, but as I moved closer, I realized it wasn't him. It was tall, thin, and dressed in tattered clothes. Its face was hidden in the shadows, but I could feel its eyes on me, piercing through the darkness. I froze, unable to move or speak. The figure didn't move, didn't even acknowledge my presence. It just stood there, staring into the fog. I was paralyzed with fear, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, out of nowhere, I heard Ben's voice, faint but urgent. "Oliver, get back inside, now." I didn't hesitate. I ran back to the cabin as fast as I could, slamming the door behind me. Ben was inside, wide-eyed and panting, as if he had been waiting for me to return. "What the hell is going on?" I asked, my voice shaking. Ben didn't answer right away. He just stood there, looking at me with a strange expression. Then, in a low voice, he said, "I didn't want to tell you this, but that figure you saw, It's part of the cabin's history. Every time the fog rolls in, it shows up. No one knows who it is, but every time it appears, someone vanishes. It's been happening for generations. I felt the blood drain from my face. I turned to look out the window, and through the thick fog, I saw the figure again, standing in the exact same spot as before. Ben grabbed my arm. "We need to leave, now." We rushed to pack our things, but as we stepped outside, the fog had thickened even further. The world had become a ghostly void, and the figure was no longer there, but I could still feel its presence. We didn't make it far. As we walked down the narrow path leading away from the cabin, I heard footsteps behind us again. This time, they were close to close. I turned around, but there was nothing there. The fog had swallowed everything, leaving us in complete darkness. That was the last time I saw Ben. I don't know if he's still out there, lost in the fog with the figure, or if the cabin claimed him as it had so many others. All I know is that I never went back, and every time I see fog, I remember that night. I can still hear the footsteps echoing in the distance. My name is Jason, and I'm not one to scare easily, but there's something about the events of that weekend that I'll never be able to explain. I've tried to forget, but every time I close my eyes, I see that cabinet's rotting wood, the flickering candlelight, and the whispers in the walls. It all started when my friend Trevor invited me to join him on a weekend getaway. He'd rented a cabin deep in the woods, far away from civilization. I thought it would be the perfect way to unwind after a long month of work. No cell service, no distractions, just nature and some much-needed peace. When we arrived, the cabin looked charming enough. It was small, with a weathered porch and a set of creaky wooden steps leading up to the front door. But something about it felt off. I couldn't place it, but the air around the cabin felt heavier than it should have been. Trevor brushed it off as nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We unpacked our bags and lit a fire in the small stone fireplace. As the night wore on, we settled in for a few drinks and stories, trying to make the best of the isolation. But as the clock struck midnight, things started to change. At first, it was small things. I'd hear faint scratching sounds coming from the walls, but when I checked, there was nothing there. Trevor thought it was just the house settling, but I wasn't so sure. The sounds grew louder as the night went on, almost like something or someone was trying to get inside the walls. That's when I started hearing the whispers. At first, it was just a soft murmur, like the wind rustling through the trees. But then, it became clearer. Low, unintelligible voices coming from the walls themselves. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was imagining things, but then Trevor looked at me, his face pale. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Before I could respond, the whisper stopped. Trevor and I sat in silence, our eyes darting around the room. I felt my skin crawl. Something wasn't right, but neither of us knew what to do. We decided to call it a night, hoping sleep would ease our growing sense of unease. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear the whispers again, louder now, like they were right next to me. I tossed and turned, but it was no use. I couldn't escape the feeling that something was in the cabin with us, in the middle of the night. I woke up to find Trevor missing. His bed was empty, the sheets tangled in a mess. Panic surged through me as I searched the cabin, calling out for him, but there was no response. Then I heard it, a voice, Trevor's voice, but it wasn't coming from the cabin. It was coming from the woods. I grabbed a flashlight and ran out the door, following the sound of his voice. The cold air cut through me as I ran deeper into the forest, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice was faint, but growing louder, as if Trevor was calling to me from far away. I finally reached a clearing, and there it was, the source of the sound. It was a small, dilapidated cabin, even older than the one we were staying in. The door creaked open as I approached, and there, standing in the doorway, was Trevor. But something was wrong. His eyes were wide and glazed, his face pale, as if he hadn't seen sunlight in years. "Trevor?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't respond. Instead, he stepped aside, motioning for me to enter. Against every instinct in my body, I stepped into the cabin. Inside, the air was thick and heavy. The walls were covered in strange symbols, carved deep into the wood. The whispers grew louder, surrounding me. I could feel them crawling under my skin, filling my ears, my mind. They were calling me, beckoning me deeper into the darkness. I tried to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me. "Jason." Trevor's voice echoed through the cabin, but it wasn't him speaking. It was something else, something ancient. I could feel the walls closing in around me, the whispers becoming deafening. I stumbled back, but I couldn't escape. The last thing I saw was Trevor's face twisted and distorted, no longer human before. Everything went black. I woke up outside the cabin, lying on the cold forest floor. The whispers were gone, but the air still felt heavy. I don't know how I got out of that cabin, but I never went back. Trevor was never found. I still hear the whispers sometimes, in the quietest moments of the night. And when I do, I know one thing for sure. The cabin is still out there, waiting for the next person to wander too close. I'm Nathan, and I've never been more terrified in my life. What was supposed to be a relaxing weekend getaway turned into a nightmare that haunts me every night. It all began when my cousin Mark suggested we rent a cabin by a secluded lake. I was skeptical, but he promised it would be peaceful and calming, just what I needed after a stressful few months. I should have known better. The cabin itself was perfect, small, wooden, and isolated, tucked away in the trees near the edge of the lake. There was no cell service, no Wi-Fi, just nature and a tiny wooden structure that felt like something out of a horror movie. But I brushed off the feeling. It was just a cabin in the woods, right? Nothing to be afraid of. The first day was fine. We spent time walking around the lake, cooking meals, and enjoying the quiet. But when night fell, the peacefulness began to feel unnerving. The wind whistled through the trees, and the lake rippled in a way that didn't feel natural. It was as if something below the surface was stirring. That evening, Mark suggested we go for a night swim. I protested, but he insisted, laughing as he grabbed the flashlight. Against my better judgment, I followed him to the lake. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow on the water, which looked disturbingly calm to calm. We waded into the cold water, the flashlight dancing across the surface. At first, it was fun, but then I heard the faintest splash, like something moving beneath the water. I froze. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice shaking. Mark laughed again, his voice a little too high-pitched. "It's probably a fish or something," but I wasn't so sure. The splash sounded too deliberate, too close. I turned to look at Mark, but he was no longer beside me. Panic shot through me. "Mark," I called out, my voice growing louder, but there was no response. I splashed my way through the water, looking for him, but the lake seemed endless, and the flashlight barely cut through the dark. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. He was standing on the far bank, facing the water, his back to me. He wasn't moving. His hair hung in his face, and his body was unnaturally still. "Mark," I yelled again, swimming toward him, but something about the way he stood there frozen felt wrong. My heart raced as I reached the shore and pulled myself out of the water. "Mark, what's going on?" I asked, my voice cracking. He didn't respond. As I got closer, I noticed his skin was pale, his eyes glazed over. He wasn't breathing. That's when I realized the Mark standing in front of me wasn't my cousin. The real Mark was still out in the lake. I turned just in time to see him struggling, his arms flailing, as something beneath the water pulled him under. His screams were swallowed by the lake, and I couldn't do anything. I was frozen in place, watching as the water returned to its calm state. The only sign of Mark's presence, a few ripples on the surface. The thing that had taken him didn't leave the lake. It still lurks beneath, waiting for the next person to wander too close to its waters. I didn't make it out with Mark that night. The thing that took him wanted me to. But somehow, I managed to escape, just barely. I'm still here, writing this, because I can't forget. I can still hear his voice, calling my name from the depths of the lake. And every time I close my eyes, I see him, standing by the shore. His lifeless eyes staring out into the water. I don't know if I'll ever escape it. The thing in the lake, ... It's still waiting. I'm Jake, and I'll be the first to admit, I never believed in ghost stories or old legends. I thought they were all just that, stories. But that was before I found myself alone in a cabin in the middle of a snowstorm, fighting for my life. It started with a simple winter trip. My girlfriend Sarah suggested we spend the weekend in a remote cabin, something cozy, away from the city and its distractions. I liked the idea. The snow was falling heavily as we drove through winding roads, heading deeper into the mountains. But as the day turned to night, things started to feel ... off. When we arrived at the cabin, it was tucked away between two snow-covered hills. It looked perfect, the kind of place you'd see in a postcard, but there was something strange about it. The air felt colder than it should have been, even though the fireplace inside was roaring with warmth. Sarah didn't seem to notice, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. I kept hearing faint noises, scratching at the door, soft whispers in the wind, but when I looked outside, nothing was there. Still, the chill that crept down my spine never went away. That night, the snowstorm grew worse. The wind howled outside, shaking the windows and rattling the door. We sat by the fire, talking and laughing, trying to ignore the eerie silence between the gusts of wind. But that's when we heard it, the sound of someone walking outside. It wasn't just the wind. It was footsteps, crunching in the snow, slow and deliberate. I opened the door, calling out, but there was no response, nothing but the storm. "I'm sure it's just the storm playing tricks on you," Sarah said, but I wasn't convinced. I locked the door and drew the curtains, trying to push the unease from my mind, but it only grew stronger as the hours passed. Around midnight, we heard it again, louder this time, almost as if it were right outside, scratching. Someone was scraping something against the wood. I grabbed the flashlight, and Sarah clung to me, both of us staring at the door. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a bear or something, searching for food. But then, I heard the voice. Soft at first, like a whisper in the wind, but clear enough to make out. "Help me." I froze. I could feel Sarah's grip tightening on my arm, but I couldn't move. The voice continued closer now, more insistent. It was coming from the back of the cabin, from the woods. "I need to get out of here," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. But when I went to unlock the door, the handle wouldn't turn. It was jammed. We were stuck inside. The voice grew louder. "Help me, please." It sounded like a child, weak and desperate. I knew we couldn't stay. I broke the window to climb out, and Sarah followed. But when we stepped outside, the cold hit us like a slap in the face. The snowstorm was blinding, and the wind howled so loudly it almost drowned out the sound of our footsteps. We tried to make our way to the road, but the snow was too deep, and the trees loomed over us like dark sentinels. That's when we saw a figure, standing in the distance. A shadow, thin and gaunt, with glowing eyes. It was watching us. We ran, not knowing where we were going, but knowing we had to get away. The figure followed us, moving faster than should have been possible in the snow. It was close now, almost on top of us. I could hear its breath ragged, desperate, like it was starving. I don't remember much after that. Just flashes of the storm, the sound of heavy breathing, and then silence. The next thing I knew, we were back in the cabin, the door wide open, and the storm outside gone. We never spoke of what happened. We packed our things and left immediately, not even stopping to look back. But as I sit here now, I can still hear the voice, faint in my mind, whispering in the wind, "Help me." I'm Daniel, and I didn't expect to be telling this story. In fact, I never thought I'd make it out to tell it at all. But here I am, sitting in the corner of a small motel room, terrified, trying to make sense of what happened. It all began with a simple decision to get away for the weekend. I've always enjoyed hiking, and when my friend Luke mentioned a cabin he'd found deep in the woods, I didn't hesitate. He said it was secluded, perfect for some time away from everything. He didn't mention that it was too secluded. The drive was long. The woods grew denser as we neared our destination, until the roads were barely visible through the thick trees. When we finally arrived at the cabin, it was like something out of an old story, hidden away. With vines crawling up the sides of the crumbling wooden structure, it felt abandoned, a feeling I brushed off, thinking it was just because it had been a while since anyone had been there. We unpacked our things and decided to settle in for the night. But something wasn't right. The silence was too heavy, the kind of silence that presses in on you. That evening, as we sat around the fire, I noticed the trees seemed closer, like they were pressing in on the cabin. The wind had picked up, and branches creaked above us. But then, I heard something footsteps, as if someone was walking around the cabin. At first, I thought it was Luke, but when I called out, no one answered. I stood up, my heart racing, and peered out the cabin's window. The darkness was thick, and I couldn't see anything. But then, I saw a figure, standing just beyond the tree line. I froze. It was watching us, staring. Luke laughed it off when I mentioned it, but I couldn't shake the feeling. That night, I slept restlessly, hearing strange noises outside, scraping, sounds, and whispers. I convinced myself it was just the wind, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The next day, we ventured deeper into the woods, trying to shake off the unease. The cabin, once charming, now felt suffocating. As we walked, Luke spotted something odd, a set of footprints, fresh in the soft dirt. They led straight into a hollow between two large trees. "Let's check it out," Luke suggested, eager for adventure. But I hesitated. I didn't like the direction they were taking us. There was something wrong with that spot in the woods. Against my better judgment, I followed him. The trees closed in, the air thick with the smell of damp earth. The footprints led us to a small clearing, where the ground dipped downward. In the center, a shallow grave, freshly dug, lay partially open. It wasn't much, just a patch of disturbed dirt, but I could feel the dread seep into me. "What the hell?" Luke whispered, his voice low. He knelt by the edge and stared at the dirt. That's when I saw it, something moving beneath the soil. It wasn't just the wind. The dirt shifted, and a hand reached out. My breath caught in my throat as I grabbed Luke's arm, pulling him away. But it was too late. The thing from the hollow emerged, as pale, twisted body crawling from the grave, its face a hideous mask of dirt and decay. Its eyes locked onto mine, and I felt my heart stop. We ran. I don't remember how I got back to the cabin, but I was shaking uncontrollably when I stepped inside. Luke followed, pale and silent, his face frozen in fear. We locked the door, but it didn't matter. The thing had followed us. I heard it outside, scratching at the walls, dragging its broken limbs across the ground. It didn't stop. It never stopped. That night, I finally gave in. I grabbed my things, telling Luke we had to leave now. But when we opened the door, the figure was standing right there. Its face was inches from mine. I don't remember much after that, just flashes of running and terror. All I know is that I somehow made it out. Now, as I sit here, trying to make sense of it all, I know one thing for sure: the cabin isn't just abandoned. Something lives there, and it's waiting for its next visitor. My name is Ethan, and I thought I was going to enjoy my weekend in the woods. A secluded cabin, a small group of friends, and a promise of peace and quiet. Little did I know that what awaited me there would be more than I could ever imagine. It all started when my friend Chloe suggested we take a break from the chaos of city life. She'd found a cabin in the woods, isolated, rustic, and far from any distractions. We all agreed. It sounded perfect. I should have known better. The cabin itself looked like something out of a horror movie, weathered, worn, and hidden deep within the forest. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just us, the trees, and the silence. It should have been peaceful, right? But something felt off from the moment we stepped inside. The air was damp and musty. The walls creaked with every gust of wind, but it was when night fell that things truly began to feel wrong. As we sat around the fire inside, telling stories and laughing, the sound of footsteps outside interrupted us. We all froze, straining to hear. There was no wind, no animals, just the echo of boots on the forest floor. Chloe went to the door, but when she opened it, no one was there. Probably just some animal, she said, trying to brush it off. But we couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. We locked the door and huddled together, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. The next morning, we found strange markings on the cabin's walls, scratches deep and jagged, as if something had clawed its way inside. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just the wind. Maybe it was a wild animal. But I knew deep down, this wasn't natural. That night, the footsteps returned, this time, louder, more deliberate. I could hear the sound of breathing outside the window. My heart pounded in my chest as I pressed my ear to the cold glass. There, in the darkness, I saw a shadow move across the porch. I backed away from the window, my breath shallow, but it wasn't just the shadow that haunted me. It was the eyes. A pair of eyes, glowing faintly in the dark, watching. I couldn't take it anymore. We had to leave. But when we tried to open the door, it wouldn't budge. Something was blocking it from the outside. We were trapped. Panic set in as Chloe screamed. She pointed to the corner of the room, where a figure stood tall, thin, its features barely visible in the dim light. It stepped forward, dragging something behind it, a heavy, wet sound that sent chills down my spine. I tried to run to the back door, but it was the same, locked tight, with something pushing against it from the outside. There was no escape. We were trapped in the cabin, with no way out, and the thing, the thing outside, was getting closer. I don't know what it was. I don't think I ever will. But as I write this, I can hear the faint sound of footsteps on the porch again. I don't think they've ever left.